We like to think of ourselves as a civilized species. We build skyscrapers, we explore the stars, and we champion human rights. But history has a dark, blood-stained basement. For centuries, the brightest minds of their time weren't just inventing the wheel or the printing press. They were busy engineering the most efficient ways to inflict unimaginable agony. From the courts of imperial China to the dungeons of the Spanish Inquisition, torture wasn't just a punishment. It was a spectacle, a science, and a terrifying tool of control. Today, we're stepping back into the shadows. We've compiled a list of the most brutal, ingenious, and stomach-churning torture methods ever devised. If you have a weak heart or a weak stomach, this might be the time to click away. For the rest of you, let's dive into the dark side of human ingenuity. The Iron Maiden. Let's start with a classic of Gothic horror. The Iron Maiden. Imagine a vertical sarcophagus, shaped like a woman, forged from heavy iron. On the outside, it looks imposing. On the inside, it's lined with dozens of strategically placed iron spikes. Here's the misconception. Movies show people dying instantly when the door's shut. That wasn't the point. The spikes were specifically designed to be short. They wouldn't pierce vital organs. Instead, they would puncture the eyes, the chest, and the limbs just enough to cause massive bleeding and infection, but not enough to end the victim's life quickly. Now, a bit of a twist. Many historians actually believe the Iron Maiden was an 18th century fake, created to make the Middle Ages look more barbaric than they were. But whether it was used in 1200 or 1700, the psychological terror it represents is very real. The knee splitter. As we move deeper into the Inquisition's toolkit, we find the knee splitter. As the name suggests, this device was designed to do one thing: render a person unable to walk ever again. The device consisted of two wooden blocks lined with sharp metal spikes. The victim's knee was placed between these blocks, and the torturer would slowly turn a screw, forcing the spikes into the flesh and bone. Eventually, the spikes would meet in the middle, completely pulverizing the kneecap and the surrounding ligaments. It was often used as a preparatory torture to make the victim more cooperative. The brazen bull. If the Iron Maiden was about piercing, our next entry was about cooking. This is the brazen bull, also known as the Sicilian bull. Designed in ancient Greece for the tyrant Phalaris, this was a hollow statue made entirely of bronze. The victim was locked inside, and a massive fire was lit underneath. As the bronze heated up, the person inside would literally be roasted alive. But the designer, Parallaeus, added a musical touch. He engineered a series of pipes in the bull's nose. As the victim screamed in agony, the sound was converted into a series of low, mournful bellows, like a real bull. Legend says that when Phalaris saw it, he was so disgusted that he forced the inventor to get inside to test the pipes. Talk about a bad day at the office. Scaphism, the boats. We move from fire to something much, much slower. Ancient Persia gives us scaphism, often called the boats. This is widely considered one of the most disgusting deaths imaginable. The victim was placed between two narrow rowing boats with their hands and feet sticking out. Then they were force-fed a mixture of milk and honey until they developed severe diarrhea. They were then coated in more honey, especially the eyes and groin, and left to float in a stagnant pond. The honey and the waste would attract thousands of flies, wasps, and bees. These insects wouldn't just bite. They would burrow into the victim's flesh to lay eggs. The victim was kept alive with daily feedings to prolong the process. Death usually came after weeks from a combination of dehydration, septicemia, and being literally eaten from the inside out. The breaking wheel. During the Middle Ages in Europe, if you were a high-profile criminal, you might meet the breaking wheel. This wasn't just a wheel, it was a rhythmic execution. The victim was tied to the ground, and the executioner would use a heavy iron-shod wheel to smash their bones, starting with the shins, then the thighs, then the arms. Once every major bone was shattered, the victim's limp body was woven through the spokes of the wheel. The wheel was then hoisted onto a tall pole. If you were lucky, the executioner gave you a blow of mercy to the chest. If not, you stayed there for days, your broken body baking in the sun, while birds began to peck at you while you were still conscious. Lingqi, death by 1,000 cuts. In imperial China, the ultimate punishment was lingqi, or the slow process. The goal here wasn't just death, it was the total disintegration of the body. The executioner would use a sharp knife to methodically remove small portions of the body, starting with the extremities over a long period. The executioner had to be a master. If the victim died too early from blood loss, the executioner could face punishment themselves. They often used opium to keep the victim conscious, but present for the agony. It was a public reminder that the state didn't just own your life, it owned every inch of your flesh. The rack. No list of torture is complete without the rack. Found in almost every medieval dungeon, it was the preferred tool for extracting information. The mechanics were simple. Your wrists were tied to one roller, your ankles to another. As the interrogator turned the handle, the tension increased. First, the muscles would tear, then the cartilage would pop. Finally, the most distinct sound of the rack, the loud, wet crack of joints being pulled out of their sockets, shoulders, hips, and knees. By the time the session was over, the victim could be several inches longer than when they started, but they would never walk again. The pair of anguish. This device proves that torture was often as psychological as it was physical. The pair of anguish was a metal instrument divided into 4 leaves. It was inserted into an orifice, the mouth, the vagina, or the anus, depending on the crime. The torturer would then turn a screw, causing the metal leaves to slowly expand inside the body. It rarely caused death, but it caused massive internal tearing and permanent mutilation. It was often used on women accused of witchcraft or men accused of unnatural acts. It is one of the most invasive and terrifying designs in the history of pain. The Spanish donkey. You might think a donkey sounds harmless. It wasn't. The Spanish donkey was a wooden wedge shaped like a V with a sharp edge pointing up. The victim was placed astride the wedge, naked. To make it worse, the torturer would tie heavy lead weights to the victim's ankles. Gravity did all the work. The sharp edge of the wedge would slowly slice through the groin and pelvic bone. Depending on the weight added, the device could eventually split the victim in half. Sawing. This method is as crude as it is effective. Used in various cultures, sawing involved hanging the victim upside down from a wooden frame. Why upside down? 2 reasons. First, it ensured that the brain received a supply of blood, keeping the victim conscious. Second, it meant the torturer started from the groin and worked down. Because the victim was inverted, they often wouldn't lose consciousness until the saw reached the mid-chest. It was a slow, agonizingly loud way to go. The Judas cradle. Similar to the Spanish donkey, but perhaps more focused on exhaustion, the Judas cradle was a pyramid-shaped seat. The victim was suspended by ropes and lowered onto the sharp point of the pyramid. The point was inserted into the anus or vagina. The victim had to use their own muscles to keep themselves from sinking further onto the point. Eventually, exhaustion would set in, and the body would slowly succumb to gravity, causing horrific internal damage and infection. The rat torture. Finally, we reach the end of our list. This method requires no complex machinery, just a basic understanding of animal instinct. This is the rat torture. A victim was tied down and a metal bowl filled with hungry rats was placed on their bare stomach. The bowl was then heated from the outside using hot coals. Rats are terrified of fire. As the bowl became searingly hot, the rats would look for any way to escape. With nowhere else to go, they would begin to gnaw. They would bite and claw through the only soft surface available, the victim's flesh. The rats would literally burrow through the victim's abdomen to escape the heat. It is a death that combines claustrophobia, the fear of vermin, and the physical sensation of being eaten alive. Conclusion. It's easy to look at these devices and see them as relics of a savage past, but they serve as a chilling reminder of what happens when power is left unchecked and empathy is discarded. Torture was rarely about finding the truth. Most victims would say anything to make the pain stop. It was about fear. It was about showing that the state had total control over your very existence. Thankfully, most of these methods have been relegated to history books. But as we look at the scars of our past, we're reminded of how far we've come and how important it is to never go back. Which of these was the most terrifying to you? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this deep dive into history fascinating, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.